But clearly, around the time of before the Civil War, right through the time of the Civil War, American elections really went downhill. So, in New York City, there were the frauds. How many people here have heard of the famous election frauds of 1838 and 1839 in New York City? Okay, Mr. Welch wrote about that. He really thought the world of it. What happened was the Whig Party contracted to work with the Whig Party in Philadelphia, and the people in Philadelphia were the ones who really knew how to pull off the frauds. So obviously election fraud was going on already in Philadelphia. But what happened was Glentworth had a conscience, and Glentworth wrote a book on what they did, not as a how-to manual, but as a warning to people to say, look out, this is how it gets done, okay? So James Glentworth did that. The New York cities were wigged by John Swift of Philadelphia, former mayor, colonel too, just all the things you like to respect in somebody. Another downhill slide. How many people here have ever heard of Bleeding, Kansas? You have. Well, we got a couple hands. Bleeding, Kansas. What happened in Bleeding, Kansas? Well, the last territorial election, before Kansas became a state, that last territorial election was to resolve things like, was it going to be a slave state? Was it going to be a non-slave state? All those other things. And so they held the election in March of 1855, and they had, the number of people, the number of ballots cast was far in excess of the total number of people who were eligible to vote. And what happened is a civil war broke out in Kansas. This was really nasty. Most of the counties were either slave or non-slave. A few counties were even split in half, but they organized their militias. Now they call it Bleeding Kansas because there was bloodshed. There were guns fired at each other, and there were men who were killed. A few. For the most part, most of them became standoffs. It was really, it was a tribute to the fact that there was some humanity in these people. But there was even one county where they, the county was split. They hadn't decided which way it's going to go. So the people who decided to, the county people were held up in the county office building, and the people who were challenging them showed up outside with a howitzer, and they said, we want all the county records because we are the county. I forget which side they were on in the battle of slave versus non-slave. But they went ahead and did that, and these people took a look at that howitzer and said, I think they mean business. So that's how one of the counties went. It was really something. That was in Kansas. That was an election here in this country, and that was a territorial election. And there's books written about it. There's a lot that could have been done. Okay, and the thing was finally resolved when Kansas became a state, and they came in as a free state, not a slave state, in 1861. How many people here have heard of the Delaware election of 1862? Okay, you can find that. You can look for Delaware election 1862. What happened was that Abraham Lincoln mobilized the military and sent the military into Delaware. A lot of people don't know this, but there were 5 slave states that fought on the side of the Union during the Civil War. Did you know that? 5 slave states. Delaware was one of them. And let's see, and then there was Kentucky, and there was Missouri, West Virginia, and Maryland. Okay, those were slave states. Anyway, the slave states, anyway, they came over there. The federal troops came in and ran their election, and they made a mess out of it. And the federal troops ran an election, and that's like bad as it can be. 1861 through 1865, Civil War. Of course, actually, one of my favorite lines whenever I talk about this is from Walter Brennan. Remember Walter Brennan? Anybody? An actor? He was a very conservative man. And he once said, "Civil War? Why, there weren't nothing civil about it." And anyway, but what happened during the Civil War? We had the biggest increase in the history of our nation to that point in absentee ballots. In absentee. Now, in early times, in early colonial America, in Rhode Island and South Carolina, and I believe another New England state, they had experimented with absentee ballots, or absentee voting. And just about everybody gave it up. They decided they don't like it. But then we had this big war going on, and we had all these men who could not vote because they were serving in the military. And so they got to vote. Now, I'm not quite sure which one was number one. It takes a while to do this kind of research because a lot of times there are no archives of this kind of information. You really have to search around through things. But absentee ballots, as we know them, were almost unheard of, even at that point. Probably the number one way of voting was voting of absentee voting was voting in the camps, as it was called. What that meant is that, and don't forget, most of the military, most of the Army guys were for, they would be, the 65th Wisconsin regulars or things like that. So they'd all be there as Wisconsin people. They could do a Wisconsin election, and they could vote in the camps. And but that was one way. There were other ways, and perhaps one of the best ways of all was done by the state of New York. Anybody here know what kind of absentee voting was done in New York? They called it the soldier vote. Do any of you, I'm sure we got a lot of internet savvy people here. I'm sure we do. And in New York, all you have to do is set your time. All right, there's a site called Chronicling America. It's run by the Library of Congress. And they found quite a few old newspapers and they digitized them. So if you set the date range to 1864, just 1864, and then look for New York and soldier vote. They called it soldier votes. That's what they called them then. You will get to read a lot about how they had to amend their constitution to allow for absentee voting. And then they got into the debates. How do we keep the election pure? And they decided the way to do it was via a proxy. In other words, you picked a friend of yours, somebody that you can trust who lived back home in your precinct. And then you got a letter and you got your commanding officer to sign it. And that way the election itself was not held where you were, the election was still held in the town where you lived or in that precinct. And as soon as the war was over, New York did away with absentee ballots. Or absentee voting. Some states kept it going. Kansas was one. Every state was different, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay, in 1868, there was a New York general election that was investigated by Congress. It was a tremendous investigation by Congress, and they did an excellent job of it. In fact, one of the repeaters, does anybody know what a repeater is? A repeater is a person who votes more than once in an election. That was the name used for it. One of the repeaters had voted 40 times. 40 times the guy voted. That's just amazing, huh? Okay, and then the 1876 presidential election, that was the final straw. Is anybody here familiar with the 1876 presidential election? That was Rutherford B. Hayes versus Tilden. Okay, and that's pretty infamous. And what you'll find is that, in my opinion, that was clearly a stolen election. That was clearly, there's quite a bit written about it. If you want to look up research on this, again, using Chronicling America, look for Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes got the nickname Rutherford. And that's not a word in the English language. And therefore, if you put that in your search engine, you're going to be in rich territory. Okay, so, but that was the final straw. And then a lot of people started trying to bring about changes. Not all states were downhill. In 1853, Massachusetts improved their secret ballot by using ballot envelopes. Does anybody know what I mean by a ballot envelope? Okay, remember I showed you earlier where I have some old tickets and how they are different shapes and things like that? Well, somebody came up with the idea in Massachusetts, why don't we give each voter an envelope? And that way you can put whatever you want to put in that envelope, and then that becomes your ballot, okay? That was an idea that was perfected in Massachusetts, and it worked out really well. And no sooner did they do that, that Rhode Island followed suit. And so there were still some people still doing it the way it's supposed to be done, and that the states are supposed to be competing to do a better job of running elections. Okay, now things started to improve again. Okay, New York City had actually prosecuted Boss Tweed, and they had implemented voter registration in New York City. When New York City did voter registration, the rest of the state did not have to. Only the city, because the city was a place where it was easy to commit fraud by going from place to place to place to place. Whereas out in the villages and things like that, everybody knows who you are, plus people are walking or riding a horse, and it's not like you can get there in 15 minutes like you can today. So there was a lot of the voter verification. I talked about that earlier, and that other states, they got rid of some crooked people in Louisiana once, and they did it all by starting with voter registration cleanups. Then the decline resumed, and in 1892, the first mechanical lever voting machine was invented. And it in itself is not necessarily bad. But if the procedures are not followed correctly, or if people refuse to allow inspectors to look at the machines, then you can get away with a lot in there too. Does anybody here know how those mechanical lever machines operated? You just pulled a lever, you went like this, tick, 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 and then it just moved a counter. It was a lot like the odometer on your car, where you click it one ahead, you click it one ahead, and all that. And the biggest problem with that was, were they starting with all zeros when they opened up for the day? And that wasn't always true. So there were some problems. In 1908, the Chicago Grand Jury Report. It's really something to read. This is excellent. The Chicago Grand Jury Report of 1908, to me, I quote from it a lot when I talk about things. The election itself, the primary, was held in August. The primary was held in August, and then it was contested, and they met the grand jury. The grand jury gave, I think, one of the finest jobs I've ever seen done. They said, for one thing, they said, why on earth do we find all these people are either government employees or relatives of government employees who are running the polls? And they said, well, it's hard to get people to work at the polls. The grand jury said, we believe you in some cases. In other cases, we doubt your story. We don't think you really looked very hard for people. We think that you found people that were amenable to cheating for you, essentially. They used other words. But the excuse given was that they couldn't get the people. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard this other than from me, because you will hear this from me fairly frequently. And that is, in 1908, the grand jury said, if you can't get enough people to work at the polls, how do you get people into jury duty? It's compulsory. It is a responsibility of a citizen to show up for jury duty. They say, why don't we do something similar to that to get people to run at the elections? And that way we can find people who are not working, who are not employees of the government and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's just an absolutely beautiful idea. Okay? So now we asked ourselves a question a little earlier, and that had to do with How do we keep, remember, we started off with a joke in here at first. Remember, I say, congratulations, I won. Well, I didn't. All right, but how do we go ahead and do that? How do we keep Kurt from stealing the vote on this thing coming up into here? If we look back on how American elections have run, what if we went ahead to make sure we could verify the eligible voters? What if we could make sure the ballots were collected in front of everybody? What if we had the ballot counters working in pairs? And what if the ballots were counted in front of everybody? What if the ballots don't leave the room until after they are counted and all results are announced immediately? What do you think of that? If you do those things, it's a lot harder for me to cheat. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but do you see? And if we look at how America has done these things with her elections, that's what we can see, okay? And so that was so much, thank you for putting up with me and my little humor here. So now, but people talk about integrity, and sometimes they even spell integrity properly. I just happen to notice that misspelling. But okay, today they say our elections are open because all you have to do is ask to be a poll watcher, right? Let me tell you, it's not easy to be a poll watcher in Texas. You have to get somebody to sponsor you, and it has to, and you have to be in a district where you are a voter. They got all these complications involved. And then when you go to sign up, you have to sign, and I think this is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, you have to sign under oath that you don't have a camera, a video camera, or an audio tape recorder on you. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because what happens if I see something bad? It's my word against theirs, right? It's my word against theirs. So, what do? I take out a video camera. All right. Now, what happens if I take out a video camera and I catch them cheating at the election? Well, we can't use that evidence in court now, can we? Because the evidence was illegally obtained.
You're in trouble now.
Yes, and I'm in trouble too for a misdemeanor. Yes, you see what I mean? So are we truly open? They'll say you're open because that's all you have to do is, believe me, and you take a look at the rules for Kentucky, for what it takes to be a poll watcher or a poll observer in Kentucky, and I ran into it, boy, it's really complicated and easy to mess up on, okay? Now, they can also make it tough to observe the vote count. People probably heard about in Michigan where they had to stand behind the glass, it'd be like the glass in the back of this room, and then people went ahead and ordered pizza and then taped the pizza boxes up. Huh?
Wasn't that Georgia?
I thought it was Michigan, but it might have been Michigan and Georgia. It might have been.
Philadelphia, they just papered over the windows.
Wow, okay. Well, you see what I mean? They'll say they're wide open, but then now here we're hearing Philadelphia, Georgia. I knew the Michigan one. Okay, now, and poll watchers and everybody trying to check on the elections, a lot of those numbers go through the elections department. That's what they found in Denton County, Texas. We found some numbers that didn't add up this past November. And boy, they haven't forgotten how embarrassed they were when they could not explain why certain numbers didn't add up. It wasn't by too many. It wasn't by enough to change any election that was in there. But now, when we ask for those forms with the numbers on them, the elections director gets together, he calls a meeting of all his people, and they all come out at once and hand me these numbers that make sense now. Yeah, but we didn't say call a huddle first now, did we? But now, so poll watchers have to be appointed, have to go through an appointment process. There's even a limit to how many poll watchers can be involved. And you ought to see some of the restrictions they used to have in Texas. And one of them is you can't even get up to use the men's room or the ladies' room, there used to be, until you'd been there for 4 hours. Because then that's, then that's considered that you left. No, you didn't leave, for crying out loud. You didn't do that, okay? But, and like I say, in Texas there, where we have to sign under oath, and that's actually a violation of your Fifth Amendment right, isn't it? to make you take an oath about something before the action itself is there. Think about it. That is, and well, we got all those things. All right. Now, modern versions of election integrity. The votes are generally counted by the computer. Sometimes there are some limited hand recounts, okay? But there are some hand recounts, and the thing I'm going to say is this. How many people here have ever, I'm quite fortunate in that I started getting involved in this when I was living in New Hampshire, and I was teaching a course at the computer science department at Riviere College down in Nashua, and I got a chance to actually count votes, and some people realized that I was not a troublemaker kind of a person. I really wanted to get involved in the system. So I wanted to actually get out there and do it. And I actually did. And we would count our votes in Ware, New Hampshire, this little town, by putting all these long tables together. And then we would be pairs of vote counters. One Republican, one Democrat, if possible. It was a little short of Democrats in this little Republican town. But there would be two of us, and you as the general public could come up within about 5 feet of us. There was a roped off area, not allowed to interfere with us, but you could actually watch as we were counting and marking off the tick marks on them. Anybody could. That's what we call open, and that is very rarely done. And now, okay. How do we get them back on track? I was asked about this one. We want to repeal motor voter, right? Yep. Me too. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona has a bill in Congress to repeal motor voter. And that's federal. So why don't you write your congressman and ask him to support Andy Biggs and his bill to repeal motor voter. Now, yes, sir.
What's motor voter?
Oh, that's the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. That's the thing that says that everybody who does any government offices and things like that has to be a voter registration center also. You get a driver's license, they automatically make a voter registration for you at the same time. You get a fishing license, you go on welfare, you automatically register you as a voter. That's the motor voter bill. That's motor voter. There's another problem too. As bad as motor voter is, and it is bad, can you believe that a court has actually made it worse? Now, we had a man talking a couple days ago in here, I don't know if he's here or not, but he talked about the case against case law. And one of the things was that there was a case, and it was Arizona versus the, the Council of Indian Tribes in Arizona, I think it was, where they said that therefore nobody was allowed to ask for any more information on a voter registration card than what was on the postcard. And it was really ugly, because there's a lot of things people would like to do, okay? Information that would be very helpful. How about if we get along here? Okay, we want to repeal HAVA, Help America Vote Act of 2002. That's that thing that went right straight down to the counties and told them to start buying all that equipment, most of which did not have paper trails even. And then there's repeal UOCAVA. Notice on the federal side, I basically say repeal, repeal, repeal. Okay, UOCAVA, the Uniform Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act. That's the thing that allows people in foreign countries to register via the internet and cast their ballots via the internet. That, believe me, this is bad because of what it does, but it's only a small number. However, when they did the recount in Arizona, the recount of the 2020 presidential, they found that the UOCAVA votes were primarily cast by people who weren't eligible for UOCAVA. They weren't uniform overseas citizens. And anyway, the potential for that, because you register via the internet and you vote via the internet. That's really bad. Okay, and there's a thing called the SAVE Act, which people are thinking is they're being pushed as a good idea. They got it through the House already. I'm really scared. That is horrible. putting American elections back on track at the state and local level. Get back to paper ballots again. And by the way, if you put enough people there counting the votes, you can get the votes counted in a reasonable amount of time if you have enough vote counters counting with them. And let's see, you can reinstate the precinct as the place where the ballots are counted. Don't send them off to these voting centers where people don't know what's going, who's in charge of what or whatever. We want to, we have to have, and they do this in Denton County, Texas. There's some good things that are happening. In the places where these things are being done by the county, they actually have audio-visual cameras and they're live streamed so people can watch what's happening in the places where they're at the voting, at the county elections office, okay? All right, publicly and immediately post the precinct vote totals. We can eliminate same-day voter registration. We heard about voter registration here with temporary driver's licenses and things like that. But if you can't figure out 30 days in advance that you're going to be old enough to vote on election day, maybe you do us a big favor if you don't vote. If you do that. Anyway, eliminate that. End early voting. Early voting is bad for a number of different reasons. Not only are those votes perhaps already in the computer where they can be monkeyed with, but another problem with them too is that is what enables repeaters to vote repeatedly in an election. It makes it a lot easier for them to do it with early voting and require a chain of custody for the ballots. So putting them back, we want to end the no excuse absentee voting. In order to vote absentee, you should have to say, here's the reason. I live in a nursing home. That's a good reason. I'm going to be out of town on a trip. I'm in the military and I'm stationed in Afghanistan. Those are all, perhaps all well excused absentee voting, okay? But the no excuse absentee balloting is what gives us large numbers of absentee ballots. All right, we want to make it easier to recruit election clerks. This idea of telling election clerks they have to work for 14 hours from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, and you got to be there before 7 until after 7, that's a 12-hour day, but then when you add the extra time in there, it's easily a 14-hour day. I don't see why people can't work for 7 hours. You're doing a job, right? And also the election judge who's supposed to be there, you go to a local store, the manager of the store, they have different managers, they have assistant managers on duty, and so we should be able to have people working 8-hour shifts, 7-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, and then we'll have the official election judge or moderator, depending on what state you're in, what you call them. We can have them there at the beginning when they first open, have them there at the end, and all that. Okay. Require a wet signature on paper for voter sign-in. That's what they mean by a wet signature. Wet signature means not an electronic signature. What's so bad about electronic signature? Okay. I hope that's applause. Okay. What's so bad about electronic signature? Once you get, once you get a copy of my signature electronically, you can use it anywhere. And look at how many places you sign electronic signatures. Now, and you do it when you're getting eyeglasses. And those people can then get into the voter registration database, and then you show up to vote election day, you've already voted. Well, do we think the political parties are going to save us? No. So it's up to us to do it, right? And the Antiquity of Freedom says, and I have this on my emails, everybody, nor yet, O freedom, close thine lids in slumber, for thine enemy never sleeps. And we have to be aware of that.